Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Reflections. Today, I just want to reflect on what I've been studying in my Bible. So, may have mentioned a few times, I'm studying Genesis now in depth. And it's funny how, again, sometimes these things that we're reading and digging in on match up with the world a little bit. And I was feeling that way a little bit before the election took place in prayer and thinking about Abraham interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah in prayer, right? And I was feeling that way, like, if this election is a form of judgment in some way, like, let us as the church intercede and pray for the righteous to be spared from the judgment. And I'm thinking through all of that and praying through that. And now we're post-ish. I don't know by the time this comes out. If honestly, let's be real. I don't think we're gonna have a president until Inauguration Day. So post-ish election, we don't know what's gonna happen. So I just think about the way that we react and we respond to all these things in the world that feel very, important and very, like, imposing on us. Like, we feel like, I think everybody this year feels like this election will absolutely affect their life. And I feel like in the past we all ignored elections because it was no big deal, right? It doesn't affect me. Like, oh, there was an election? Yeah, whatever. The world goes on. And, maybe you just don't like the guy or whatever. But I feel like this time everybody feels like, oh, this is going to affect me. And it probably will. But it just reminds me, as I'm reading through Genesis and I'm thinking about the scenarios in these people's lives, like Abraham and Isaac and then Jacob, and how in certain scenarios, right, God comes in and makes promises to them, like especially over and over about their seed, right? And there are many nations that will come from them and how they will be blessed and how he will be with them. And then they go and they're in life and they do stupid things, right? Like when they're in the scenario, and they both did it, where they're in scenarios where, they come to a place where they say that their wife is their sister because they're scared that they would be killed so that their wife, who's very fair, would be taken, and all of these things. And the specific promise I'm thinking about is like God saying, like, your seed will be blessed and you'll have many nations that come from you. And then it takes too long to conceive, so we give Abraham Hagar, right? Because, well, that's his seed too. Like, let's help God, right? And we don't, like, trust him in those moments. But we're talking about people like Abraham here, who are, like, super righteous, right? Like, as far as Christianity would say, like, they're the VIPs of Christianity, Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, and talks about all throughout the Bible later, like the God of Abraham and the God of Jacob. And when you study that, like, you see, like, they are the same as us. Like, they're the same. They still get worried. Like, he sits and talks with Abraham, and Abraham's like, oh yeah, good. And then he goes and he lies to the king because he's scared, right? And it's like, isn't that funny? Like, that's what we would do. Like, because we would say, yeah, we know God and we know that promise and we trust him. And then the world is in our face right there. And then we just react, like, really quickly. And we're like, oh, wait, like, But if you keep reading, God doesn't, smack him over the head for that. God then goes and tells the king that he's one of my prophets. Like, he doesn't say, like, oh no, he's dirty, rotten Abraham, like, he lied to you. He says, let him go and bless him because, he's one of mine. And I think we forget these promises. And I think this is the big thing I'm trying to focus on during this whole, like, election time frame of, like, craziness. The world is irrelevant. Like whatever situation is in front of us and whatever these things are that we're seeing that are scary or worldly or whatever, or could, we could die and all these things, just like with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Like, do we remember God's promises? Like, do we remember what God has told us? God tells us over and over in his word, he will never leave us. He will never forsake us. He is with us. He will give us everything we need. He kind of laughs about it, and in my mind he's laughing about the fact that like we worry about what we're like. God knows you need food. God knows you need things. He says he will provide them, right? Do you believe that? Do you trust that? Do you remember that? Or do you like just react like quickly to the world? And I think it's interesting because each one of these men and through history, right? Like they've had to kind of like take that torch and take those promises and continue them and keep going with them. And they got passed down, right? Like the torch got passed down, like from Abraham to Isaac and to Jacob, and then later from Moses to Joshua, right? And were those guys freaking out? Like they probably were. Like Joshua, after Moses died, like holy cow, like could you imagine like how he felt? Like he didn't know what was going to happen. He saw all the stuff that happened with Moses and how crazy, like in the world in front of him, like that was a crazy time, like that must have been really scary, but God had promises, right? And we can read now because it's history, right? And we can look back and did God keep his promises? He does, right? So he always, like, find a spot in the Bible where God goes back on his word. Doesn't happen. I was talking with someone recently, and I said there's a difference between believing the Bible and having faith in the Bible. And there's knowing this all and believing that it happened as history, and then there's knowing that it's God's current living word and it's relevant right now to you. It's still going on. It's still true. It wasn't true when it happened, it's still true. So I guess my reflection is, guys, all this stuff is relevant. We're talking about the beginning of time here with the first like bloodline of people, and it's the same thing that we're going through. It's just a different story tweaked a little bit. And when these men and these people put God first and, we're in relationship with God, it worked out. And that's the key, is God makes promises to us. We have to respond to them, right? We have to respond to them. They're there. They're available. He loves us. He just wants us to love him back, right? And not worry about the world. He says, don't worry about anything, right? We're supposed to just pray. So my reflection is, do you remember God's promises? Do you believe God's promises? Because we can know them and not have faith in them. So I would challenge you this week, read, look up, Google if you don't know where they're at already. Google some of the crazy stories in the Bible of the most nonsensical things that happen, and read those stories and see what happens with those people and see how it works out when God is first in their life, no matter what is happening in the world. It always works out. So please share this video. I'm hoping it could encourage anyone today. I know that we're in a crazy time, so just try to dig in your word, guys, because that's where all the real answers are. I know you're not going to get anywhere else. I love you, and God loves you. Have a great week.